Consider the quiet discomfort that often arises in social settings when a truly profound intellect speaks. It is not always overt hostility, nor a direct challenge, but a far more insidious and subtle shift in the atmosphere. A nervous laugh that doesn't quite reach the eyes, a hasty change of subject that feels almost desperate, or a sudden, unexplained withdrawal of engagement, leaving the air thick with unspoken tension. The individual might articulate a complex truth, elegantly dissecting an intricate problem, or offer a nuanced perspective that illuminates a situation from an entirely new angle. They might even challenge a deeply held yet unexamined assumption that underpins much of the group's shared reality. And the response, instead of genuine curiosity or eager discussion, is a palpable tension, a collective tightening, as if an invisible thread connecting the group has been abruptly stretched to its breaking point. This phenomenon, observed across diverse cultures and meticulously documented throughout human history, suggests something far more profound than mere disagreement or a clash of personalities. It hints at a fundamental human tendency to resist that which threatens the established order of thought, the comfortable patterns of feeling, and the delicate fabric of social cohesion. Arthur Schopenhauer, the sagacious 19th century German philosopher, observed this pattern with unflinching clarity, positing that society's rejection of genius is not an anomaly, not a regrettable oversight, but a predictable and almost inevitable consequence of the human condition itself. It is a mirror reflecting back not the genius, but the inherent limitations and defensive mechanisms of the beholder. This essay delves into the intricate dynamics of why society often rejects profoundly intelligent individuals, weaving together Schopenhauer's astute philosophical observations with contemporary psychological insights and timeless spiritual wisdom. We will explore this rejection not merely as a superficial social phenomenon, a quirk of human interaction, but as a deep-seated reflection of psychological defense mechanisms and spiritual resistances embedded within the collective human psyche. By integrating these diverse perspectives, from the rational rigor of philosophy to the empirical observations of psychology and the transcendent insights of spirituality, we aim to understand not just the surface mechanisms of this societal pattern, but its deeper meaning, its underlying causes, and crucially, the pathways toward fostering a more discerning, resilient, and ultimately, a more accepting culture that can truly embrace genuine wisdom. From a psychological standpoint, the rejection of profound intelligence can be understood through the lenses of cognitive dissonance, social conformity, and ego defense mechanisms, each playing a crucial role in creating this subtle yet pervasive resistance. When an individual's superior intellect presents ideas that fundamentally contradict widely accepted beliefs, or dares to challenge the comfort of the familiar and the security of the status quo, it can trigger significant cognitive dissonance within others. The mind, programmed to seek coherence and reduce this uncomfortable mental tension, may resort to dismissing the source of the dissonance, the intelligent individual and their challenging insights, rather than grappling with the unsettling truth itself. It's often easier, psychologically speaking, to label the messenger as arrogant, eccentric, or out of touch, than to confront the potential crumbling of one's own deeply held worldview. Furthermore, the innate human drive for social conformity and the powerful need for belonging often leads individuals to align with the majority, even if it means actively rejecting outliers whose perspectives disrupt group harmony or shatter a perceived consensus. The fear of ostracization, however subtle, can be a potent motivator. The profound intelligence, therefore, becomes a perceived threat to the ego, not just of individuals who feel intellectually outmatched or exposed, but of the collective, exposing vulnerabilities, biases, and the often unacknowledged limitations of conventional thought. It highlights what others might prefer to ignore about their own intellectual comfort zones. Spiritually, this societal rejection resonates deeply with ancient wisdom traditions that speak of ignorance, avidya in Buddhism, the ego's tenacious attachments, nafs in Sufism, ahamkara in Hinduism, and the seductive allure of illusion, maya. Profound intelligence, in its purest, most penetrating form, often pierces through these veils, revealing uncomfortable truths about the nature of reality, the pervasive presence of suffering, and the often unflattering aspects of the human condition that many are simply not spiritually or emotionally prepared to confront. The unenlightened or unawakened ego, deeply invested in its self-created narratives, its comforting illusions, and its carefully constructed sense of self-importance, perceives such clarity as an existential threat to its very existence. It is a confrontation with a reality it would rather not acknowledge. Christian contemplative traditions, too, speak eloquently of spiritual blindness and the inherent difficulty of discerning profound truth when one is deeply attached to worldly comforts, material possessions, or even intellectual pride. The very pride that can prevent one from admitting the limits of one's own understanding. Existential philosophy further illuminates this struggle by highlighting the profound human struggle with authenticity, where conforming to societal norms and expectations often takes precedence over the arduous, lonely path of independent thought and genuine self-realization. To truly be oneself, especially when that self sees differently, is often to invite societal friction. Schopenhauer's philosophy provides a powerful and foundational framework for this exploration. He posited that the vast majority of humanity is driven by the will, a blind, irrational, ceaseless striving for existence, for more, for perpetuation, with intellect serving merely as its subservient instrument, designed to navigate the world in service of these desires. The truly intelligent, and especially the genius, possess an intellect that can to some extent detach itself from the will's immediate, relentless demands, allowing for a more objective, comprehensive, and often profoundly unsettling view of reality. This detachment grants them a perspective that transcends the everyday scramble for survival and gratification, enabling them to see the underlying mechanisms of existence with unvarnished clarity. This makes the intelligent individual an anomaly, a disquieting presence, a mirror reflecting uncomfortable truths back to a society largely content in its illusions, its petty pursuits, and driven by the will's mundane, often unconscious impulses. It is a reflection that reveals not just the surface of things, but the deeper, often chaotic currents beneath. This essay will unpack how this philosophical framework aligns seamlessly with both psychological defense mechanisms and spiritual concepts of egoic resistance, demonstrating how profound insight, rather than being celebrated, is often met with a reflexive pushback from a collective psyche unprepared for such stark honesty. In the chapters that follow, we will first establish a comprehensive psychological and spiritual framework for understanding the rejection of intelligence, drawing heavily from Schopenhauer's incisive insights into the nature of genius and mediocrity and how these distinct modes of being interact. We will then examine the modern manifestations of this phenomenon, exploring how contemporary society, with its unique pressures, its rapid information cycles, and the often superficial connectivity of digital landscapes, perpetuates or even exacerbates this age-old pattern of resistance. Next, we will bring these theories to life through illustrative examples and compelling case studies, ranging from historical figures whose brilliance was met with scorn or misunderstanding, through philosophical anecdotes that highlight key principles, to contemporary scenarios that demonstrate the pervasive and enduring nature of this rejection in our daily lives. Finally, we will explore practical integration strategies, offering guidance for both intelligent individuals navigating a sometimes unwelcoming world, helping them to find their place without compromising their truth, and for society itself seeking to cultivate a greater appreciation for genuine wisdom and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Our journey will reveal that the discomfort evoked by profound intelligence is not merely a social quirk or an unfortunate interpersonal dynamic, but a crucial indicator of humanity's ongoing psychological and spiritual evolution, or its resistance to it. We have established that the discomfort society exhibits toward the profoundly intelligent individual is not merely a social anomaly, but a deeply rooted phenomenon, explicable through a confluence of psychological and spiritual principles. Our initial examination alluded to Schopenhauer's foundational framework, positing that the genius, by transcending the immediate service of the will, gains an objective, unsettling clarity that acts as a disquieting mirror to a world largely content in its illusions. Now we must delve deeper into this intricate interplay, dissecting the precise mechanisms through which the collective human psyche constructs its formidable resistance to unvarnished truth. To comprehend the psychological and spiritual dimensions of this rejection, we must first revisit Schopenhauer's metaphysical architecture, particularly his concepts of the will and representation. For Schopenhauer, the will is the blind, irrational, ceaseless striving that constitutes the ultimate reality of everything. It is a primal, insatiable force underlying all phenomena, driving existence itself. The intellect, for the vast majority of humanity, serves this will. It functions as a tool for survival, for the perpetuation of the species, for the acquisition of desires, and for the construction of a coherent, manageable representation of reality. A world of individual objects and causal relations designed to facilitate the will's incessant demands. This representation, while seemingly objective, is fundamentally subjective, tailored to the needs and biases of the individual and collective will. It is a comforting illusion, a necessary simplification that allows us to navigate a complex existence without being overwhelmed by its underlying absurdity and suffering. The truly intelligent individual, or the genius, however, presents a profound deviation from this norm. Their intellect, through a rare and potent capacity, achieves a temporary, sometimes sustained detachment from the immediate servitude of the will. This liberation allows them to perceive the world not merely as a utilitarian representation serving their desires, but as it is in itself, an objective contemplation of the Platonic ideas, the eternal forms underlying phenomena. This detachment bestows upon them an extraordinary clarity, an ability to see through the veils of Maya, the comforting illusions woven by the will. They apprehend truths that expose the constructed nature of societal norms, the superficiality of conventional pursuits, and the often unacknowledged suffering inherent in the will's relentless striving. This unvarnished clarity, while a hallmark of genius, becomes the very source of their societal estrangement, for it directly threatens the meticulously crafted representations that underpin collective human experience. The psychological mechanisms of rejection, which we previously touched upon, gain immense explanatory power when viewed through this Schopenhauerian lens. Consider, for instance, cognitive dissonance. When the truly intelligent individual articulates an insight that challenges deeply held beliefs, societal narratives, or personal comforts, it creates a profound and unsettling psychological tension within the listener. This is not merely a disagreement over facts, it is an assault on the very scaffolding of one's perceived reality, a direct confrontation with the will's carefully constructed representation. The genius's truth, often nuanced and complex, demands a re-evaluation of established paradigms, a dismantling of cherished convictions, and a willingness to embrace uncertainty. For the average individual, whose intellect is primarily engaged in rationalizing the will's desires and maintaining a stable, coherent worldview, this demand is immensely taxing. The easiest, most energy-efficient resolution to such dissonance is not to assimilate the challenging truth, which would necessitate a potentially painful restructuring of one's mental landscape, but to dismiss or devalue the source. Thus, the intelligent individual is branded as eccentric, impractical, overly theoretical, or simply wrong, effectively neutralizing the threat their insight poses to the psychological equilibrium. Furthermore, social conformity and the herd mentality become palpable forces in this dynamic. Society in its broadest sense functions on shared fictions, comfortable consensus, and a collective agreement on what constitutes reality. These shared fictions are the very fabric of the will's collective representation, necessary for social cohesion and the efficient perpetuation of the species. The truly intelligent individual, by virtue of their independent thought and their capacity to see beyond these fictions, inherently disrupts this fragile equilibrium. Their nonconformity, their willingness to question the unquestionable, is perceived not merely as intellectual dissent, but as a direct threat to the group's solidarity. Humanity, deeply ingrained with evolutionary imperatives for group belonging, harbours a primal fear of the other or the outsider who deviates from the established norm. The genius, in their singular pursuit of truth, often stands apart, their unconventional perspectives highlighting the collective's intellectual inertia. This triggers a reflexive pushback, a subtle but pervasive pressure to conform, or, failing that, to ostracize. The collective, preferring the comforting warmth of shared illusion over the chilling discomfort of individual truth, subtly but surely isolates the one who dares to illuminate the shadows. Finally, ego defense mechanisms play a crucial, often insidious role. The intellect of the average person is, as Schopenhauer suggests, inextricably intertwined with their ego, our ideas, our beliefs, our understanding of the world. These are not merely abstract constructs, but integral components of our self-identity. A challenge to these ideas is therefore often perceived as a personal attack, an affront to one's intelligence, competence, or worth. The truly intelligent individual, by presenting a more objective, profound, or nuanced truth, inadvertently exposes the limitations or attachments of the unawakened ego. Their insights, by revealing alternative perspectives or deeper complexities, can make others feel intellectually inferior, uninformed, or simply uncomfortable with their own lack of critical depth. This triggers a powerful array of ego defense mechanisms: defensiveness, rationalization, projection, and even outright hostility. The ego, desperate to maintain its perceived superiority or competence within its established representation, will resort to various strategies to diminish the genius's credibility, to find flaws in their logic, or to simply dismiss them as arrogant or out of touch. The rejection in this context is a desperate act of self-preservation, a defense against the painful deflation of the ego. Beyond these psychological bulwarks, the rejection of profound intelligence also resonates with deep spiritual dimensions. Here, Schopenhauer's insights find potent echoes in Eastern philosophies, particularly the concept of avidya, or spiritual ignorance. The will, in its ceaseless striving, binds humanity to a cycle of desire and suffering, creating a world of illusion, the veils of Maya. Most individuals are deeply embedded in this illusion, identifying intensely with their desires, their social roles, their personal narratives, and the transient phenomena of existence. This constitutes the unawakened ego, perpetually seeking validation and meaning within the confines of the will's representation. The truly intelligent individual, by seeing through these veils, by achieving a degree of detachment from the will's immediate demands, exposes the fundamental fragility and often illusory nature of these attachments. Their quote 10 becomes an existential threat to the unawakened ego. It reveals the underlying suffering inherent in the will's striving, the impermanence of all things, and the ultimate emptiness of many conventional pursuits. Such truths are terrifying to an ego that finds its solace and meaning precisely in these illusions. The rejection, therefore, is not merely a psychological defense, but a spiritual one, a desperate clinging to comfort, a refusal to confront the deeper realities that might necessitate a radical shift in one's understanding of self and existence. The genius, in their capacity to perceive the world sub specie aeternitatis, to see the universal in the particular, inadvertently holds up a mirror to humanity's collective spiritual blindness. This brings us back to the powerful metaphor of the disquieting mirror. The intelligent individual, by articulating profound truths, acts as a reflection, showing society its collective blind spots, its cherished delusions, its attachment to the superficial, and its often unacknowledged fear of the unknown. This reflection is profoundly uncomfortable because it demands self-examination, a critical appraisal of one's values, and potentially a dismantling of one's entire worldview, a task for which most are unwilling or unprepared. The profound discomfort, the subtle withdrawal, the nervous dismissal are all symptomatic of this confrontation. They are not acts of malice, but rather deeply ingrained, almost instinctive human reactions to anything that threatens the established order of the individual and collective psyche. Anything that demands a re-evaluation of the will's comforting, yet ultimately illusory, representation of reality. Thus, we observe how Schopenhauer's profound philosophical framework illuminates the complex interplay of psychological and spiritual forces that culminate in society's subtle yet pervasive rejection of the truly intelligent. It is a rejection born not of malevolence, but of a fundamental human resistance to truths that destabilize the ego, challenge social cohesion, and pierce the comforting veils of illusion. The cost of this resistance, both for the individual genius and for societal progress, is immense, and it is to the exploration of these repercussions and their contemporary manifestations that we shall turn our attention in subsequent chapters. The psychological and spiritual mechanisms of resistance, which we have meticulously dissected in our preceding explorations, are not mere abstract theoretical constructs. Rather, they manifest with an insidious ubiquity in the intricate tapestry of contemporary society. The discomfort and defensive recoiling from unvarnished clarity, once understood as a fundamental human tendency, find new and complex expressions in an era characterized by unprecedented connectivity and information saturation. Indeed, the genius, armed with their Schopenhauerian detachment and an intellect unburdened by the will's insistent demands, continues to serve as that disquieting mirror, reflecting uncomfortable truths back upon a collective psyche, often ill-equipped or unwilling to confront its own carefully constructed illusions. Consider, for instance, the sprawling digital landscape, a modern agora where ideas are ostensibly exchanged with unprecedented speed and reach. One might anticipate that such an environment, theoretically fostering a global marketplace of thought, would be fertile ground for profound intellectual discourse. Yet the reality frequently presents a stark counter-narrative. The architecture of social media, designed to optimize engagement through algorithmic reinforcement, often inadvertently creates echo chambers where pre-existing biases are affirmed and dissenting or challenging perspectives are systematically marginalized. Here, the truly intelligent individual, whose insights are by their very nature nuanced, complex, and often counterintuitive, becomes an anomaly, their profundity frequently lost amidst the clamour for simplistic narratives, immediate gratification, and readily digestible sound bites. The cognitive dissonance triggered by an intricate argument that demands sustained intellectual effort is easily resolved by a swift scroll past, a dismissive emoji, or, more egregiously, by the collective derision that marks the public shaming rituals of quote 12. This phenomenon, far from being a purely moral or political critique, often functions as a potent mechanism of social conformity, a rapid and aggressive ostracization of any voice that dares to disrupt the prevailing consensus or expose the inherent contradictions within a group's shared fictions. The genius, by virtue of their capacity to perceive reality beyond these comfort-providing veils, becomes an existential threat to the fragile coherence of these digital tribes, their clarity perceived not as illumination, but as an unwelcome, even hostile intervention. Beyond the ephemeral currents of online discourse, the resistance to profound intelligence permeates the more structured environments of institutional and professional life. In the corporate world, for example, the premium is frequently placed upon team players, conformity to established protocols, and the pursuit of incremental, measurable objectives. A truly sagacious individual, whose insights might challenge foundational assumptions or propose radically innovative, albeit initially disruptive, paradigms, can be perceived as an impediment. Their capacity to see beyond the immediate horizon, To articulate the systemic flaws or the long-term implications of current practices is often met not with appreciation but with nervousness. The very detachment from the will that grants them their objective clarity can be misconstrued as a lack of passion or practicality, their nuanced understanding dismissed as overthinking. The corporate ego, much like the individual ego, prioritizes stability and predictable progression over the unsettling upheaval that genuine intellectual breakthroughs often necessitate. The genius, in this context, becomes an inconvenient truth-teller, a harbinger of change that threatens the comfortable inertia of the status quo and is subtly sidelined, their contributions minimized or reinterpreted to fit within existing frameworks. Even within the hallowed halls of academia, ostensibly the ultimate bastion of intellectual inquiry, the truly intelligent individual can face a peculiar form of rejection. While academic institutions champion the pursuit of knowledge, they are also complex social structures, susceptible to the same human frailties that plague society at large. Tribalism, dogmatic adherence to established schools of thought, and the entrenchment of intellectual power structures can create an environment where truly paradigm-shifting ideas, particularly those that challenge the very foundations upon which influential careers or entire departments have been built, are met with profound resistance. The pressure to publish within specific frameworks, to conform to prevailing methodologies, and to engage in intellectual gatekeeping can stifle the radical originality that characterizes genuine genius. A scholar whose intellect allows them to synthesize disparate fields, to question long-held assumptions with unvarnished clarity, or to articulate truths that dismantle cherished theories, may find themselves marginalized, their work dismissed as unconventional, unfounded, or simply too far outside the mainstream, a subtle but potent form of cognitive dissonance at an institutional level. The truly brilliant in their pursuit of objective truth inadvertently exposed the intellectual limitations and self-serving biases that can fester even in environments dedicated to enlightenment. At the heart of this pervasive societal rejection often lies a deeper, more uncomfortable truth, the fear of inadequacy. Schopenhauer's assertion that the common intellect is inextricably tethered to the will, seeking practical utility and immediate comfort, elucidates this dynamic perfectly. The insights of the genius are not merely different. They frequently highlight the inherent limitations of conventional thought, the superficiality of common concerns, and the fundamental spiritual blindness that characterizes the unawakened ego. When confronted with such profound clarity, the collective human psyche, driven by its innate desire for coherence and self-preservation, experiences a palpable sense of unease. This discomfort can quickly transmute into resentment, as the genius inadvertently exposes the relative mediocrity of the majority's intellectual pursuits and their attachment to comforting illusions. Society then employs a myriad of subtle tactics to diminish the perceived threat, labeling the truly intelligent as eccentric, socially awkward, impractical, arrogant, or simply too much, appellations that serve to discredit the individual without ever having to engage with the substance of their insights. This systematic character assassination is a powerful defense mechanism, allowing society to maintain its comfortable patterns and preserve its collective self-esteem by invalidating the messenger rather than grappling with the unsettling message. The genius, in their unwitting role as a mirror, forces an uncomfortable self-examination, triggering an instinctive pushback that is rarely malicious in intent, but devastating in its effect. The cost of this pervasive rejection, both for the individual and for the broader sweep of human progress, is immeasurable. For the truly intelligent individual, it often translates into profound isolation, a gnawing sense of frustration, and tragically the potential for self-censorship, where the fear of societal reprisal or alienation leads to the suppression of their most valuable insights. Their unique capacity for objective perception, their Schopenhauerian detachment from the will, which should be celebrated as a rare and precious gift, becomes instead a burden, separating them from the very society they might otherwise uplift. For society, the consequences are equally dire. The systematic marginalization of genuine intellect leads to stagnation, a perpetuation of superficiality, and a squandering of opportunities for authentic progress. When profound truths are dismissed in favor of comforting fictions, when nuance is sacrificed for simplistic narratives, and when critical inquiry is supplanted by unthinking conformity, the collective human endeavor suffers an insidious intellectual impoverishment. The veils of Maya remain firmly in place, obscuring their path to deeper understanding and perpetuating cycles of ignorance and illusion. The resistance, therefore, is not merely a personal slight against a few exceptional individuals. It is a profound impediment to humanity's collective awakening, a self-imposed limitation on our capacity to evolve beyond the blind, ceaseless striving of the will. We must therefore seek not only to understand the roots of this rejection, but to explore the pathways through which both the truly intelligent individual and society at large might transcend these deeply ingrained patterns, fostering an environment where clarity is cherished and wisdom is embraced. The disquieting mirror held by the truly intelligent, as we have posited, reflects not merely uncomfortable truths, but exposes the very scaffolding of collective illusion that underpins societal coherence. The costs of this pervasive rejection, as we have begun to delineate, extend far beyond the personal suffering of the genius, reaching into the very fabric of a society deprived of its most incisive self-critique. Yet, to fully grasp the profound tragedy of this dynamic, we must delve deeper into the intricate architecture of rejection, examining not only its psychological and spiritual roots, but also the deliberate and often unconscious mechanisms by which society fortifies its 27 against the piercing clarity of genuine intellect. The threat posed by the truly intelligent individual is not simply one of differing opinion or challenging belief. It is more fundamentally an existential one. The genius, by virtue of their intellect's emancipation from the immediate servitude of the will, perceives reality with an unvarnished clarity that transcends the comforting 28 collectively constructed and maintained. This perception reveals the arbitrary, often contingent nature of many societal constructs, norms and values that are otherwise mistaken for objective, immutable truths. When the genius articulates these insights, they do not merely criticize a particular policy or ideology, nor they implicitly question the very foundations upon which the collective identity, comfort, and shared sense of purpose are built. This is akin to revealing the stage props and lighting mechanisms of a grand theatrical production to an audience wholly absorbed in the illusion. The reaction, therefore, is rarely one of considered debate, but rather an instinctual, almost primal, defense of the cherished illusion. The collective will, manifesting through the myriad individual wills, actively resists any force that threatens to dismantle the carefully curated world in which it strives and finds its temporary satisfactions. This deep-seated resistance manifests through a panoply of discrediting and marginalizing mechanisms, each serving to neutralize the perceived threat without necessarily engaging with the substance of the intelligence itself. One of the most insidious of these is the process of misinterpretation and simplification. Profound thought, by its very nature, is nuanced, multi-layered, and often resistant to reductionist summaries. The genius's articulation, steeped in precision and intellectual rigor, often clashes with society's preference for easily digestible narratives, sound bites, and categorical assertions. Consequently, complex ideas are frequently flattened, distorted, or cherry-picked, their radical implications excised to fit pre-existing cognitive frameworks or ideological agendas. What began as a subtle, analytical insight into the human condition might be dismissed as mere cynicism, or a nuanced critique of power structures reduced to simplistic anti-establishment rhetoric. This intellectual flattening serves to defang the idea, rendering it palatable, but ultimately inert, incapable of catalyzing genuine introspection or change. The original thought, stripped of its essential complexity, becomes a mere shadow of itself, easily dismissed or absorbed into the very quote 29 it sought to critique. Beyond the misrepresentation of ideas lies the more direct and often brutal tactic of ad hominem attacks and character assassination. When the intellectual substance of an argument proves too challenging to refute, the focus often shifts from the message to the messenger. The truly intelligent individual, whose very presence can evoke feelings of intellectual inadequacy or discomfort in others, becomes an easy target for character assault. Labels such as quote 30, quote 31, quote to 32, quote 33, or even quote 34 are readily deployed. These descriptors, while ostensibly commenting on personality traits, serve a powerful ego-defensive function for the collective. By pathologizing the individual, society can conveniently dismiss their insights as products of a flawed personality rather than uncomfortable truths. This allows the collective to avoid the arduous and often painful process of self-examination that the genius's insights demand. The perceived social deviance of the intelligent individual becomes a convenient excuse to invalidate their intellectual contributions, thereby preserving the comfortable illusion of collective wisdom and competence. Furthermore, the mechanisms of ostracization and social exclusion operate with a quiet yet potent efficacy. The truly intelligent individual, who often finds solace in solitude and intellectual pursuits, rather than conforming to superficial social rituals, can be subtly, or overtly, pushed to the periphery. This can manifest as a gradual fading from social circles, a lack of invitations, or a quiet professional marginalization where their contributions are overlooked or undervalued. In academic or corporate settings, this might involve being denied opportunities, being passed over for promotions, or having their innovative proposals quietly shelved. This form of rejection is particularly insidious because it often operates without overt conflict, relying instead on a pervasive sense of exclusion that can be profoundly isolating. The message is clear: conform or be relegated to the fringes, where your disruptive insights can do no harm to the established order. Perhaps the most sophisticated and subtle mechanism of neutralization is co-option. In some instances, truly intelligent ideas, particularly those that gain a certain undeniable resonance, are superficially adopted by the mainstream but stripped of their radical, transformative power. They become commodified, transformed into popular buzzwords, self-help cliches, or diluted management paradigms, losing their critical edge and becoming integrated into the very system they once challenged. An idea that initially sought to dismantle a fundamental societal illusion might be repackaged as a motivational slogan, its profound implications for systemic change conveniently ignored. This process allows society to appear progressive and open to new ideas, while simultaneously disarming the truly disruptive potential of those ideas, rendering them harmless additions to the existing, quote, 35, rather than catalysts for its fundamental re-evaluation. This constant clash between the discerning intellect of the genius and the defensive mechanisms of society is profoundly exacerbated by a fundamental divergence in communication styles. The truly intelligent individual often operates with a meticulous precision, prioritizing accuracy, nuance, and the exhaustive exploration of a subject. Their language is often dense, their arguments multifaceted, and their conclusions carefully qualified. Their objective is truth, regardless of its palatability. Society, however, often operates with a preference for rhetoric, seeking consensus, emotional resonance, and immediate gratification. The demand is for clarity that borders on simplicity, for brevity over depth, and for conclusions that affirm rather than challenge. The patience required to truly engage with complex thought is often scarce in a culture increasingly driven by rapid information consumption and superficial engagement. This disjunct creates an almost insurmountable barrier where the genius's carefully constructed insights are perceived as overly complicated, pedantic, or simply incomprehensible to an audience conditioned to a different mode of intellectual engagement. The quote 36 of the detached intellect, free from the will's distortions, becomes foreign to those still deeply entrenched in its subjective world. The cumulative effect of these mechanisms inevitably shapes the internal landscape of the genius. The profound loneliness that accompanies unshared insight is a heavy burden. To perceive truth that others cannot or will not see, while simultaneously being misunderstood, misrepresented, or actively rejected, can lead to a deep sense of alienation. This isolation often presents a difficult choice: to continue speaking truth and face perpetual rejection, or to self-censor, to dumb down their ideas, or to withdraw entirely into their own intellectual world. Schopenhauer himself, a figure who famously experienced profound isolation and lack of recognition during his lifetime, serves as a poignant illustration of this internal struggle. His work, initially met with indifference, only gained widespread acclaim posthumously, a testament to society's often delayed and reluctant recognition of true genius. The moral dilemma for the intelligent individual is acute: to compromise the integrity of their insights for social acceptance, or to maintain intellectual fidelity at the cost of profound solitude. Revisiting the societal cost through this deeper lens reveals a wound far more profound than mere intellectual stagnation. By consistently rejecting its most insightful members, society blinds itself to its own errors, its own illusions, and its own potential for genuine evolution. It becomes trapped in a self-perpetuating cycle of ignorance, avidya, unable to critically examine the fundamental flaws within its representation. This refusal to confront uncomfortable truths allows harmful cycles and inefficiencies to persist, often for generations, simply because the voices capable of articulating the deeper problems have been silenced or dismissed. The erosion of genuine intellectual discourse, replaced by superficiality and ideological conformity, leads to a collective atrophy of critical thinking. Society, in its desperate attempt to maintain comfort and coherence, inadvertently sabotages its own capacity for progress, self-correction, and ultimately collective awakening. The veils of Maya, once mere illusions, are actively fortified by the very mechanisms of rejection, ensuring that the collective remains comfortably ensconced in its self-made prison of perceived reality. It is imperative, therefore, that we move beyond a mere acknowledgement of this phenomenon and strive for a comprehensive understanding of its intricate dynamics. Only by dissecting the architecture of rejection, by laying bare the psychological, spiritual, and social mechanisms at play, can we begin to envision pathways toward a more enlightened societal engagement with genuine intelligence. The task ahead is not merely to appreciate the genius, but to fundamentally alter the cultural landscape that so instinctively resists the unvarnished clarity they offer. The intricate dynamics of societal rejection, as we have meticulously unpacked, reveal a chasm, a fundamental divergence between the unvarnished clarity of the truly intelligent individual and the collective human psyche's often unconscious allegiance to comfort, coherence, and the reassuring illusions of the representation. Having illuminated the profound costs of this persistent schism, both for the individual genius and for society at large, we now turn our focus to the perhaps more arduous, yet undeniably imperative task, contemplating the pathways toward a more receptive culture. This is not to suggest a simplistic remediation of an issue rooted in the very fabric of human cognition and the relentless striving of the will, but rather an exploration of how societal structures, educational paradigms, and individual consciousness might evolve to mitigate, if not entirely transcend, this pervasive resistance. To embark upon this endeavour, we must first acknowledge the deep-seated nature of the resistance itself. It is not merely a superficial aversion, easily dispelled by a well-articulated argument or a compelling data set. Rather, it is an existential defense mechanism, protecting the ego from the discomfort of self-doubt, safeguarding social cohesion from the disruptive force of radical truth, and preserving the collective representation from the disquieting incursions of objective reality. Schopenhauer's profound insight into the will's primacy reminds us that intellect, for most, serves the will's ends, constructing a worldview that is expedient and comforting, not necessarily true. To challenge this inherent bias is to ask society to confront its own spiritual blindness, its own avidya, a task that necessitates a transformation far more profound than a mere shift in policy or rhetoric. It demands a cultivation of receptivity that begins at the very foundations of individual and collective learning. One of the most potent avenues for fostering such receptivity lies in a radical re-envisioning of education. Current pedagogical models, often prioritizing rote learning, standardized testing, and the assimilation of pre-approved narratives inadvertently reinforce the very tendencies that lead to the rejection of genuine intelligence. They train individuals to seek answers rather than to formulate incisive questions, to conform to established frameworks rather than to challenge their underlying assumptions. What is required instead is an educational philosophy that champions critical inquiry, intellectual humility, and the courageous embrace of cognitive dissonance. Students must be taught not merely what to think, but how to think, to dissect arguments, to identify logical fallacies, to discern nuance, and, crucially, to sit with the discomfort that arises when cherished beliefs are challenged. This involves actively cultivating a pedagogical environment where questioning authority, exploring conflicting viewpoints, and admitting ignorance are not just tolerated, but celebrated as essential components of intellectual growth. Only by training successive generations to navigate the complexities of thought without succumbing to the immediate gratification of simplistic answers can we hope to build a societal substrate capable of engaging with, rather than recoiling from, profound insight. Beyond the formal structures of schooling, the cultivation of intellectual humility must pervade the broader societal discourse. We observe with increasing alarm a cultural landscape where certainty is valorized and doubt is often perceived as weakness. Dogma, whether political, ideological, or even scientific, frequently trumps nuanced inquiry, leading to an environment antithetical to the genius's probing clarity. To counter this, society must actively promote an ethos where the questioning of established beliefs is not merely permissible, but actively valued. The Socratic method, in its purest form, offers a timeless model, a relentless pursuit of truth through self-examination, where the recognition of one's own ignorance becomes the very genesis of wisdom. This necessitates a collective understanding that while collective intelligence can be powerful for coordination and problem-solving within defined parameters, it is often bound by the lowest common denominator and highly susceptible to the gravitational pull of groupthink. True intellectual progress frequently originates from the solitary, anomalous mind that dares to see beyond the collective's comfortable consensus. Furthermore, a culture desiring to embrace genuine intelligence must consciously create and safeguard spaces for nuance and complexity. The modern informational ecosystem, characterized by its relentless pursuit of brevity, speed, and superficial engagement, is inherently hostile to the profound, multi-layered insights that define true intelligence. Sound bites, trending hashtags, and algorithmic amplification of the sensational over the substantive conspire to marginalize any idea that cannot be reduced to a digestible, immediately gratifying morsel. How then might we re-engineer our public forums, our media landscapes, and even our digital platforms to prioritize depth over breadth, sustained inquiry over fleeting attention? This demands a deliberate shift in cultural metrics, moving away from the quantification of clicks and shares towards the qualitative assessment of genuine understanding and thoughtful engagement. We must strive to establish third spaces, whether physical or virtual, where diverse viewpoints can genuinely interact, where ideas can be debated without the immediate pressure for tribal affiliation or the threat of instant cancellation. These are arenas designed for exploration and intellectual wrestling, not for the reaffirmation of pre-existing biases. While the primary burden of adaptation rests with society, we must also consider, with judicious caution, the role of the intelligent individual in this bridging endeavour. It is crucial to state unequivocally that the genius is not obligated to dilute their truth or compromise their clarity to appease societal resistance. Their value lies precisely in their unvarnished perception. However, there can be a strategic art to communication that does not equate to capitulation. Can profound insights be articulated in ways that, while maintaining intellectual rigour, are more accessible to minds not yet accustomed to their depth? This is not about dumbing down, but about finding resonant analogies, crafting compelling narratives, or employing a pedagogical patience that gradually leads the audience toward understanding rather than overwhelming them. Sometimes the wise fool archetype can be instructive. Truth, when presented through metaphor, art, or even a strategic indirectness, can bypass initial ego defenses, allowing the seed of insight to germinate before the full force of its implications is consciously registered. The intelligent individual, while never abandoning their core commitment to truth, might consider the delivery of that truth as a craft in itself, recognizing that societal awakening is often a gradual process, not an instantaneous revelation. Ultimately, the deepest layer of this transformation touches upon the spiritual dimension, upon society's capacity to awaken from avidya, the ignorance that binds it to the illusions of the representation. Schopenhauer's philosophy, with its emphasis on detaching from the will, offers a framework for understanding that true clarity emerges from a cessation of blind striving, from a contemplative stance that allows the world to be perceived objectively, rather than through the distorting lens of desire and utility. How can a society so deeply entrenched in the will's relentless push for material gain, social status, and superficial pleasures be encouraged to question its own veils of Maya? This is perhaps the most formidable challenge, demanding not just intellectual shifts, but a collective spiritual evolution. It entails valuing introspection, mindfulness, and the philosophical pursuit of meaning over the ceaseless demands of the external world. Art and philosophy, in their highest forms, serve as critical vehicles here, offering glimpses beyond the everyday representation, challenging conventional perceptions and inviting a deeper engagement with existence itself. They can create the cracks in the edifice of collective illusion through which the light of unvarnished clarity might begin to penetrate. The path forward, then, is neither singular nor swift. It is an arduous, multifaceted journey, requiring a profound re-evaluation of our educational systems, our public discourse, and our very cultural values. It demands a collective will to cultivate intellectual humility, to embrace complexity, and to consciously create spaces where genuine wisdom can flourish without fear of immediate rejection. For the individual genius, it may involve a strategic patience in communication, a recognition that the paradigm shift they embody is a long game. The ultimate benefit, however, is immeasurable. A society more adaptable, more resilient, and more truthful, capable of navigating the existential challenges of its age with genuine insight rather than entrenched ignorance. The journey to bridge this chasm between the truly intelligent and the resisting collective is, in essence, the journey toward a more enlightened human condition, a testament to the enduring power of understanding and the persistent hope for collective awakening. The subsequent chapters will delve into more specific frameworks and practical applications for fostering such a transformative cultural shift. Having outlined the necessary pathways for a more receptive culture, we must now delve deeper into the intricate mechanics of their implementation, acknowledging that the theoretical scaffolding, however robust, demands a profound understanding of practical application and the formidable resistance it invariably encounters. The transition from positing an ideal to manifesting it in the recalcitrant fabric of human society is fraught with complexities, requiring not merely intellectual assent but a fundamental reorientation of collective consciousness. How precisely does a society so deeply entrenched in its comfortable illusions and driven by the relentless, often unexamined impetus of the will, begin to dismantle the very mechanisms of rejection that have served as its psychological and spiritual bulwark? The practical integration strategies which we previously touched upon necessitate a radical reimagining of our foundational societal structures, beginning most critically with education. A truly transformative educational paradigm extends far beyond the mere dissemination of information. It must cultivate an environment where intellectual humility, critical inquiry, and a profound comfort with ambiguity are not just tolerated but actively celebrated. This involves fostering pedagogical approaches that prioritize Socratic dialogue over didactic instruction, encouraging students to grapple with paradoxes, to question received wisdom, and to develop the cognitive fortitude to sit with discomforting truths without immediately seeking refuge in simplistic answers or dogmatic certainty. Such an education would not merely present complex ideas, but would equip individuals with the intellectual and emotional resilience to process them, to differentiate between the will's seductive representations and the unvarnished clarity of objective reality. The goal is to nurture minds that are not merely repositories of facts, but agile instruments capable of discerning nuance, embracing complexity, and ultimately recognizing the genius not as a threat, but as a vital conduit to deeper understanding. Furthermore, the creation and diligent defense of spaces for nuanced thought become paramount in an era increasingly characterized by intellectual polarization and the tyranny of the immediate. These are not merely physical spaces, though intellectual salons, philosophical societies, and protected academic forums certainly play their part, but conceptual spaces within public discourse where the slow, meticulous dissection of ideas can occur unmolested by the clamour of superficiality or the exigencies of political expediency. This demands a collective commitment to intellectual patience, a willingness to engage with arguments on their merits, however challenging, and a deliberate eschewal of the reductive impulses that fuel echo chambers and, quote 43, quote, "For the truly intelligent individual, strategic communication within these nascent spaces becomes a delicate art. It involves the profound challenge of translating complex insights into accessible frameworks without sacrificing fidelity to truth, employing analogies and metaphors not to simplify to the point of distortion, but to build bridges of understanding across the chasm of conventional thought. This demands a Socratic wisdom, the ability to guide rather than dictate, to illuminate rather than merely declare, all while navigating the inherent human tendency to recoil from what is unfamiliar or unsettling. Yet, the efficacy of these strategies is perpetually shadowed by society's deep-seated resistance. a phenomenon elucidated vividly through historical and contemporary case studies. Consider, for instance, the poignant trajectory of Galileo Galilei, whose telescopic observations shattered the Ptolemaic cosmology, a representation of the universe that, while anthropocentrically comforting, was fundamentally misaligned with objective reality. His insights, born of rigorous empirical observation and profound intellectual penetration, were met not with open inquiry, but with ecclesiastical condemnation and forced recantation. The rejection of Galileo was not merely a scientific dispute. It was a profound societal defense mechanism against a truth that threatened the entire edifice of religious dogma, political power, and the comforting, will-driven illusion of human centrality in the cosmos. His genius served as a disquieting mirror, reflecting an uncomfortable truth that challenged not just a theory, but a deeply ingrained worldview, triggering a collective cognitive dissonance that manifested as persecution. Society, in its attachment to the established order and its fear of the unknown, chose the familiar illusion over the unsettling clarity. Similarly, the fate of Giaste, Socrates' Gaudian compelled to drink hemlock for corrupting the youth, and impiety, offers another stark illustration. Socrates, through his relentless questioning, his dialectical method, sought to expose the ignorance beneath the veneer of presumed wisdom, compelling individuals to confront the limits of their own understanding and the often unexamined assumptions that governed their lives. He was, in essence, a living embodiment of the truly intelligent individual, challenging the will's comfortable representations by forcing self-reflection. His rejection stemmed from the profound discomfort his unvarnished clarity induced. He exposed the hypocrisy and intellectual laziness of the powerful, thereby threatening the social coherence built upon agreeable fictions. His death was society's ultimate act of self-preservation, an attempt to silence the uncomfortable truth-teller who dared to illuminate the spiritual blindness of the collective. In a more contemporary vein, we observe analogous patterns of rejection in the digital age, albeit often less dramatically violent. The phenomenon of cancel culture, for example, frequently serves as a mechanism to silence voices that articulate complex, nuanced perspectives on highly polarized social issues. An individual who dares to introduce shades of grey into a black and white narrative, who questions the prevailing orthodoxies of any given ideological camp, or who insists on intellectual rigour over emotional appeal, often finds themselves swiftly ostracized, their arguments deliberately misrepresented and their character assassinated. This is not merely a failure of communication, it is society's collective ego defense mechanism in action, a visceral recoil from the cognitive dissonance inherent in confronting a perspective that disrupts the comfortable coherence of one's chosen ideological representation. The truly intelligent individual in this context becomes a target precisely because their insights threaten the very foundations of these constructed realities, demanding a level of intellectual effort and self-reflection that the collective, driven by the will's desire for immediate gratification and simplistic answers, is often unwilling to undertake. These historical and contemporary echoes underscore the deeply entrenched nature of society's resistance, bringing us to the most arduous question. How does a society, so predisposed to rejecting its own most profound insights, achieve the necessary cultural and spiritual transformation? This is not a process that can be legislated or mandated. It is a profound internal shift, an undertaking that demands nothing less than a collective awakening from the slumber of the will. The path to this transformation, we contend, begins not with a sudden, monolithic shift, but with the aggregate of individual efforts, each person's willingness to confront their own illusions, to scrutinize their egoic attachments, and to question the comforting yet ultimately distorting representations of reality shaped by the will, contributes to the gradual erosion of collective ignorance. It is a slow, often painful process of self-excavation, requiring individuals to cultivate a profound intellectual courage, the courage to listen to ideas that challenge deeply held beliefs, to engage with arguments that feel unsettling, and to embrace the unsettling clarity that objective truth often brings. Moreover, history suggests that significant societal shifts often emerge from periods of profound discomfort or crisis. When the will's relentless striving leads to undeniable suffering, when the comfortable illusions that underpin a society become manifestly untenable, or when existential threats force a re-evaluation of its constructed reality, the ground becomes fertile for transformation. The truly intelligent individual in this context acts as a Cassandra figure, pointing out the cracks in the edifice long before its collapse, serving as a precursor to necessary discomfort. Their insights, initially rejected, may eventually be revisited and understood as prescient warnings, paving the way for a collective re-evaluation. This is not to advocate for crisis, but to acknowledge its potential as a catalyst for collective awakening, forcing society to confront the limitations of its will-driven existence and to seek a deeper, more objective understanding of its predicament. Ultimately, the achievement of a genuinely receptive culture is a generational struggle against deeply ingrained patterns of resistance. It demands a sustained commitment to intellectual rigor, emotional maturity, and a spiritual openness to truths that transcend the ego's defenses. It is a call for society to transcend its nervous defensiveness and embrace the truly intelligent not as an anomaly to be rejected, but as an indispensable guide towards a more enlightened existence, one where the unvarnished clarity of objective reality is no longer feared, but is instead welcomed as the very foundation of genuine progress and profound understanding. The journey is arduous, the resistance palpable, but the imperative for this transformation, for the very evolution of human consciousness, remains undeniable. Having meticulously dissected the intricate mechanisms of societal rejection, from the psychological bulwarks of cognitive dissonance to the spiritual blinders of avidya, we now pivot our inquiry towards the arduous yet imperative task of remediation. The chasm between profound insight and collective understanding, though formidable, is not irrevocably fixed. It is, we contend, a construct of accumulated habits of thought, fear and attachment, habits that can, with deliberate and sustained effort, be systematically dismantled and reconfigured. Our focus shifts, therefore, to the potential pathways towards a more receptive culture, one wherein the unvarnished clarity of the truly intelligent individual is not merely tolerated, but genuinely embraced, recognized as indispensable for humanity's deeper flourishing. The most foundational of these pathways resides in a radical re-envisioning of education, moving beyond its current utilitarian and often superficial paradigms. Contemporary educational systems frequently prioritize the assimilation of facts and the acquisition of skills geared towards economic productivity, inadvertently stifling the very intellectual curiosity and critical discernment that define genuine intelligence. To foster a culture capable of appreciating profundity, education must transform into a crucible for critical inquiry, intellectual humility, and, perhaps most crucially, a profound comfort with ambiguity. This entails a pedagogical shift from rote memorization to dialectical engagement, from passive reception to active Socratic questioning. Children from their earliest formative years ought to be exposed not merely to what to think, but to how to think, to the rigorous processes of logical deduction, ethical reasoning, and philosophical contemplation. The aim is to cultivate minds that are not merely repositories of information, but agile instruments of inquiry, capable of navigating complex ideas without succumbing to the facile comfort of reductionism or the defensive posture against unfamiliar truths. Such an education would deliberately introduce philosophical concepts, ethical dilemmas, and the history of ideas in a manner that encourages independent thought rather than dogmatic adherence. It would celebrate the process of intellectual exploration, the joy of discovery, and the profound satisfaction of grappling with difficult questions, even if definitive answers remain elusive. Intellectual humility, the recognition of the vastness of what remains unknown, and the provisional nature of much of what is deemed certain, would be instilled as a cardinal virtue. This would counteract the prevalent societal tendency to equate certainty with competence, a dangerous predisposition that renders individuals resistant to new information that challenges established belief systems. By cultivating comfort with ambiguity, we prepare minds to inhabit the nuanced spaces where profound truths often reside, spaces that are inherently uncomfortable for those accustomed to rigid categories and binary oppositions. This re-envisioned education would, in essence, serve as a preparatory ground for confronting the unsettling mirror of genius, gradually accustoming the collective psyche to the reflective scrutiny it so often resists. Parallel to this educational reformation is the imperative to safeguard and actively cultivate spaces for nuanced thought. In an era dominated by instantaneous communication, soundbite culture, and algorithmic echo chambers, the delicate fabric of sustained complex discourse is perpetually threatened. The modern digital landscape, while ostensibly connecting individuals, often fragments intellectual exchange, rewarding brevity and emotional resonance over depth and reasoned argumentation. We must, therefore, consciously establish and protect intellectual havens, physical and virtual, where the pursuit of truth, however challenging or unconventional, is not only permitted but actively encouraged. These sanctuaries of sagacity might manifest as independent research institutes, specialized academic forums, or digital platforms meticulously designed to facilitate deep, asynchronous discourse, insulated from the pressures of virality, commercial exploitation, and the tyranny of public opinion. These spaces would operate on principles antithetical to the prevailing social media dynamic. The anonymity that often fuels vitriol would be replaced by accountability and intellectual integrity. The pursuit of consensus would yield to the celebration of reasoned disagreement, and the fleeting nature of attention would be supplanted by an insistence on sustained engagement. The very architecture of these platforms would be designed to filter out noise, to incentivize substantive contributions, and to foster a culture of mutual intellectual respect, even amidst profound ideological divergence. Here, the intelligent individual would find not only receptive ears, but also minds capable of engaging with their insights on their own sophisticated terms, thereby mitigating the profound isolation that so often accompanies unvarnished clarity. It is within such protected environments that nascent ideas can be rigorously tested, refined, and gradually introduced into the wider societal discourse, allowing for a more organic and less confrontational assimilation of challenging truths. Furthermore, the onus of bridging this chasm does not rest solely on society's capacity for receptivity. It also requires a strategic and empathetic approach from the intelligent individual themselves. This is not to suggest a dilution or compromise of truth, for the integrity of profound insight is paramount. Rather, it pertains to the art of communication, the sagacious framing of complex ideas in ways that, without sacrificing nuance, render them more accessible to a collective consciousness often unprepared for their full implications. Schopenhauer himself, for all his uncompromising clarity, wrestled with the challenge of conveying his philosophy to a resistant world. The truly intelligent individual must in essence become a translator, not of languages, but of conceptual frameworks, understanding the prevailing, quote, 48 of their audience and gently guiding them towards a broader, more accurate perception. This strategic communication involves a profound understanding of human psychology, recognizing the inherent resistance to ideas that threaten one's world view or sense of self. It demands patience, empathy, and a willingness to engage in a step-by-step unraveling of complex propositions, rather than presenting a fully formed, overwhelming edifice of truth all at once. The Socratic method, with its gentle probing and guided discovery, offers a powerful model, inviting individuals to uncover insights for themselves, rather than having them imposed. This approach circumvents the ego's natural defensiveness, allowing new ideas to take root more organically. It necessitates a careful calibration of language, eschewing unnecessary jargon where simpler, yet equally precise terms suffice, and employing analogies and metaphors that resonate with common experience without oversimplifying the underlying truth. The challenge lies in distinguishing between simplification, which makes complex ideas comprehensible, and oversimplification, which distorts or diminishes them. This is a delicate balancing act, requiring not only profound intellect but also a rare blend of wisdom and compassionate understanding of the human condition. Ultimately, however, the most profound and transformative pathway towards a truly receptive culture lies in a collective spiritual awakening. This is not a sudden, cataclysmic event, but rather a gradual generational process, a slow, arduous turning away from the blind, incessant striving of the will and towards a more conscious, contemplative mode of existence. For society to truly embrace profound intelligence, it must first begin to confront its own avidya, its deep-seated spiritual blindness, and its attachment to the comforting illusions of Maya. This entails a collective willingness to look beyond the immediate gratification of desires, the fleeting triumphs of ego, and the superficial allure of material pursuits, recognizing them as mere symptoms of the will's ceaseless agitation. This awakening requires individuals one by one to embark upon the introspective journey of questioning their own fundamental assumptions their attachments, and the narratives that define their existence. It is a process of gradually detaching the intellect from its subservience to the will, allowing it to operate not merely as a tool for survival and self-preservation, but as an instrument of objective apprehension and profound understanding. As more individuals cultivate this detachment, as they begin to perceive the world not solely through the distorting lens of their desires and fears, but with a measure of Schopenhauerian objectivity, the collective consciousness will slowly but inexorably shift. The disquieting mirror of genius will then cease to be a source of discomfort and threat, becoming instead a cherished guide, reflecting truths that illuminate the path towards genuine liberation and enlightenment. This is the ultimate promise, a future where wisdom is not merely tolerated but revered, where the truly intelligent are not ostracized but embraced as the sagacious navigators of humanity's evolutionary journey towards a more profound and conscious existence. The challenge is immense, the path fraught with resistance, yet the potential for human flourishing that lies beyond these veils of illusion is a vision worthy of our most dedicated and sustained pursuit. Having meticulously dissected the myriad mechanisms through which society, driven by its inherent discomfort and the blind striving of the will, invariably rejects the truly intelligent, we now turn our attention to the formidable, yet indispensable task of envisioning a path forward. The chasm between the unvarnished clarity of genius and the collective's preferred illusions is not immutable, though its bridging demands a profound reorientation of our cognitive, social, and spiritual paradigms. This is not a call for a mere adjustment of policy, but for a fundamental recalibration of human consciousness, a deliberate cultivation of receptivity to truths that, while disquieting, are ultimately liberating. We propose a multifaceted approach, recognizing that no single intervention can dismantle the deep-seated resistances that have historically insulated the collective from genuine wisdom. Our first, and perhaps most foundational imperative lies in a radical educational reform. The prevailing pedagogical models, largely designed to transmit information and reinforce established frameworks, inadvertently serve as formidable bulwarks against the very intellectual agility required to apprehend complex truths. They often prioritize rote memorization over critical inquiry, conformity over independent thought, and the acquisition of just fortunist answers over the courageous exploration of ambiguity. This system, in its current incarnation, inadvertently trains the intellect to remain subservient to the will, crafting comforting representations that avoid the discomfort of genuine objective apprehension. Students are taught what to think rather than how to think, thereby perpetuating a collective predisposition towards cognitive dissonance when confronted with ideas that challenge their constructed realities. To genuinely foster an environment where profound intelligence can thrive and be integrated, education must undergo a paradigm shift. We must cultivate a deep-seated intellectual humility, instilling in learners the understanding that knowledge is provisional, constantly evolving and inherently limited. This involves encouraging a comfort with uncertainty, a willingness to revise deeply held beliefs in the face of new evidence, and an acute awareness of one's own cognitive biases. The Socratic method, far from being a mere historical curiosity, must become a central pillar of this reformed pedagogy, guiding students through the rigorous process of questioning assumptions, identifying logical fallacies, and constructing coherent arguments. This method, by empowering individuals to discover truth through their own inquiry, mitigates the ego's defensive posture, transforming the reception of challenging ideas from a direct confrontation into a shared journey of intellectual discovery. Furthermore, education must actively foster intellectual courage, the fortitude to articulate unpopular truths, to stand firm against groupthink, and to embrace the potential for ostracization that often accompanies genuine insight. Only by nurturing these qualities can we begin to dismantle the psychological scaffolding that supports societal rejection, preparing future generations to not merely tolerate, but actively seek out the unsettling mirrors of profound intelligence. Complementing this educational revolution is the urgent necessity of cultivating spaces for nuance. In our contemporary milieu, characterized by the relentless pursuit of immediate gratification, the tyranny of the soundbite, and the pervasive tribalism of digital discourse, the very concept of nuance often appears an anachronism. Complex ideas are ruthlessly simplified, reduced to binary oppositions, or dismissed outright if they fail to align with pre-existing ideological frameworks. This environment, far from fostering intellectual growth, actively reinforces the will's impulse for certainty and the ego's demand for validation, creating echo chambers where superficiality reigns and genuine intellectual exchange is stifled. We must consciously design and protect physical and virtual environments specifically dedicated to the rigorous, sustained, and dispassionate exploration of complex ideas. These are not merely forums for debate, but sanctuaries where the pressures of social conformity, commercial imperative, and political expediency are deliberately attenuated. Imagine modern-day salons, academic colloquia, or curated online platforms where the metric of success is not virality or immediate agreement, but the depth of inquiry, the precision of argumentation, and the collective advancement of understanding. Within these spaces, the inherent discomfort that arises from confronting challenging truths must be acknowledged, but also transcended through a shared commitment to intellectual rigor and mutual respect. Disagreement, rather than being perceived as a personal affront or a precursor to conflict, should be celebrated as an essential catalyst for deeper insight. Such environments would function as temporary enclaves from the pervasive influence of the will, allowing for a more detached and objective consideration of ideas, akin to the aesthetic contemplation Schopenhauer describes, where the intellect is momentarily freed from its subservience to desire. Here, the truly intelligent individual finds not only a receptive audience, but also a community of fellow travellers, all engaged in the arduous, yet ultimately rewarding pursuit of unvarnished clarity. Beyond systemic reform and the creation of specialized intellectual sanctuaries, a crucial onus rests upon the truly intelligent individuals themselves, the development of strategic communication. While their profound insights are often presented with an unvarnished clarity that can be jarring to the uninitiated, the solution is emphatically not to dilute or compromise the truth. To do so would be to betray the very essence of their gift and to perpetuate the societal stagnation they seek to alleviate. Instead, the intelligent individual must become a translator, a bridge builder, capable of conveying profound truths in a manner that is both accessible and empathetic, without sacrificing intellectual integrity. This demands extraordinary patience and a deep understanding of the psychological and spiritual resistances that underpin societal rejection. The truly intelligent must recognize that their objective apprehension of reality, so clear to them, strikes at the very core of the collective's cherished subjective representations. They must approach this task with a compassionate awareness of the discomfort and even fear their insights can evoke. The Socratic method, once again, proves invaluable here, not as a tool of intellectual dominance, but as a gentle guide. By asking incisive questions, leading others to discover inconvenient truth through their own reasoning processes, the intelligent individual can circumvent the immediate ego defense mechanisms that often arise when a challenging idea is directly imposed. This approach transforms the intellectual encounter from a perceived threat into a collaborative exploration. Furthermore, the strategic use of analogy, metaphor, and compelling narrative can illuminate abstract philosophical concepts, grounding them in relatable human experience without sacrificing their essential complexity. The intelligent individual must learn to speak the language of the will, not to affirm its illusions, but to gently guide it towards a recognition of its own limitations, gradually preparing the ground for a deeper, more objective apprehension of reality. This is an act of profound intellectual generosity, a willingness to meet society where it is, rather than where one wishes it to be, and to patiently guide it toward a more enlightened state. Ultimately, however, all these interventions are merely preparatory steps toward the most profound and transformative shift, a collective spiritual awakening. This is not a sudden epiphany, nor a universal adherence to a specific dogma, but rather a gradual generational process of detaching from the will's blind striving, confronting collective ignorance, avidya, and valuing introspection and objective apprehension over superficial pursuits. Schopenhauer's philosophy, with its incisive dissection of the will as a ceaseless irrational force driving all phenomena, offers a powerful framework for understanding this ultimate liberation. For the collective to genuinely embrace profound intelligence, it must begin to loosen its tenacious grip on its self-serving representations and its attachment to the fleeting illusions of Maya. This awakening manifests as a profound increase in collective self-awareness, a recognition of the will's impulses not only within individual psyches, but also within societal structures, cultural narratives, and political agendas. It involves a gradual reduction in the collective's attachment to egoic narratives, material accumulation, and the endless cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. As society begins to value wisdom over mere information, depth over breadth, and intrinsic understanding over extrinsic validation, the discomfort posed by the truly intelligent begins to dissipate. Their insights are no longer perceived as an attack on comfortable illusions, but as invaluable signposts on the path toward greater clarity and freedom. This requires a societal embrace of contemplative practices, a willingness to engage in sustained introspection, and a reorientation of collective priorities away from the mundane and towards the metaphysical. It is a slow, often arduous process, requiring sustained effort across generations. But it is the only path that leads to a society where the intellect serves truth and understanding, rather than merely rationalizing the will's desires. In such a society, the genius is not an anomaly to be feared or rejected, but a harbinger of collective potential, a living testament to humanity's capacity to transcend its own limitations and apprehend a more objective, compassionate reality. This is the ultimate aspiration, to evolve towards a receptive, enlightened human consciousness, where genuine wisdom is not feared, but embraced as indispensable for humanity's progress and deeper understanding, beyond the comforting, yet ultimately limiting veils of illusion. The most profound and perhaps most arduous solution to society's persistent rejection of genuine intelligence lies in what we have termed a kultura. Collective spiritual awakening. This is not a mere shift in pedagogical methods or the careful curation of intellectual discourse, but a fundamental reorientation of the human spirit, a gradual generational detachment from the will's blind striving, and a courageous confrontation with collective ignorance, avidya, and the pervasive illusions, maya, that veil objective reality. It is, in essence, an evolution of consciousness, moving beyond the comfort of self-created narratives and the relentless, often subconscious, pursuit of superficial gratification. We contend that the will, in its myriad manifestations within the individual and collective psyche, represents the primary impediment to this awakening. Schopenhauer sagaciously demonstrated how the intellect, for the vast majority, serves primarily as an instrument of the will, crafting quotes that are not reflections of truth, but rather convenient fictions designed to sustain the individual's desires, fears, and egoic structures. To awaken, therefore, is to begin the painstaking process of disentangling the intellect from this subservience, allowing it to perceive the world not as it wishes it to be, but as it is. This unvarnished clarity, so characteristic of the truly intelligent individual, becomes the very goal of the collective spiritual journey. Consider the inherent resistance. Humanity, as a collective, finds immense solace in its illusions. These are the intricate tapestries woven from cultural narratives, shared biases, personal aspirations, and the comforting predictability of routine. To suggest that these are mere maya, flimsy veils obscuring a more profound, albeit often unsettling reality, is to invite a profound sense of existential dread. The ego, deeply invested in its self-definition and its constructed world, perceives the dismantling of these illusions as a threat to its very existence. It is a form of cognitive dissonance amplified to a societal scale, where the collective unconscious actively resists any truth that disrupts its coherence or exposes its vulnerability. The truly intelligent individual, with their capacity for objective apprehension, thus becomes a disquieting mirror, reflecting not only individual shortcomings, but the collective spiritual blindness that underpins societal structures. The path to a collective awakening is neither linear nor easily traversed. It demands an initial, deeply personal introspection, a willingness to question one's most cherished beliefs and assumptions. This is where the individual journey of detachment from the will must begin, one consciousness at a time. Yet, the collective is more than the sum of its parts. It possesses an inertia, a gravitational pull towards conformity and the familiar. For a societal awakening to gain traction, these individual shifts must reach a critical mass, creating a palpable countercurrent against the prevailing tides of unexamined existence. It requires a societal revaluation of what constitutes, quote, 51, quote, moving away from the relentless accumulation of material wealth or social status, towards the cultivation of inner wisdom, empathy, and a deeper understanding of one's place within the cosmos. What, then, is the practical manifestation of this spiritual awakening? It is not a sudden cataclysmic event, but a gradual unfolding, a generational shift in priorities and perceptions. In an awakened society, the pursuit of knowledge would transcend mere utility, becoming an end in itself, a means to apprehend truth, not merely to manipulate the world for personal gain. Empathy would deepen, born not from sentimentality, but from a profound understanding of shared suffering and interconnectedness, a realization that all individual wills are but manifestations of the same underlying striving force. The arts would flourish as expressions of universal ideas rather than mere entertainment. Political discourse, currently mired in tribalism and egoic posturing, would elevate to a reasoned pursuit of the common good, informed by a nuanced understanding of complex systems and human nature. Crucially, in such a society, the truly intelligent individual would no longer be an anomaly, a disquieting presence to be ostracized or misunderstood. Instead, they would be recognized as invaluable guides, their unvarnished clarity serving as a beacon rather than a threat. Their insights, once met with defensive resistance, would be sought out, integrated, and celebrated. The societal infrastructure, educational institutions, media, public forums would be designed to foster critical inquiry, intellectual humility, and a comfort with ambiguity, rather than reinforcing dogma or superficiality. The very definition of success would transform, prioritizing wisdom over wealth, compassion over power, and genuine understanding over performative certainty. However, we must not underestimate the formidable power of the will and the ingrained patterns of avidya. The temptation to retreat into comforting illusions, to shy away from the often painful truths revealed by deeper introspection, remains potent. Even in an environment conducive to awakening, the journey requires immense courage and sustained effort. It demands a constant vigilance against the ego's subtle strategies of self-deception, and the collective's insidious pull towards intellectual complacency. The process is one of continual purification, shedding layer after layer of acquired prejudices, conditioned responses, and attachments to the ephemeral. The role of philosophy in this grand project becomes paramount. Schopenhauer's insights, once dismissed as pessimistic or overly intellectual, would be understood as foundational maps for navigating the terrain of human consciousness. His distinction between the will and representation, his elucidation of suffering as inherent to the will's striving, and his pathways to aesthetic contemplation and ascetic detachment offer potent tools for this spiritual liberation. Similarly, the wisdom traditions of the East, with their deep explorations of avidya and maya, their emphasis on mindfulness, meditation, and ethical living, provide complementary frameworks for cultivating the inner conditions necessary for awakening. A collective spiritual awakening, therefore, is the ultimate aspiration, the long-term vision that informs and underpins all other proposed solutions. Radical educational reform, the cultivation of spaces for nuance, and strategic communication by intelligent individuals are all vital preparatory steps, clearing the ground and planting the seeds for this deeper transformation. Without a fundamental shift in humanity's relationship to truth, to its own inner landscape, and to the pervasive influence of the will, these other efforts risk remaining superficial temporary ameliorations rather than genuine remedies. We acknowledge the immense idealism embedded within this proposition. The current trajectory of human society, often characterized by increasing fragmentation, the valorization of superficiality, and a deepening attachment to the very illusions we seek to dissipate, appears to challenge the feasibility of such an awakening. Yet, it is precisely in the face of such pervasive spiritual blindness that the necessity of this aspiration becomes most acute. The suffering inherent in the will's endless striving, the environmental degradation wrought by unchecked desires, the societal conflicts fueled by egoic attachments, these are but symptoms of a deeper spiritual malaise. To truly heal these societal wounds, to foster a culture where genuine wisdom is not feared but embraced as indispensable, we must dare to envision and then painstakingly work towards the profound reorientation of the collective human spirit. It is a testament to the enduring power of philosophical insight that Schopenhauer centuries ago laid bare the fundamental dynamics that continue to define our predicament, and simultaneously pointed towards the only path to true liberation, a courageous confrontation with the self, leading to a detachment from the will and an embrace of unvarnished clarity. This, ultimately, is the crucible in which a society truly capable of valuing intelligence must be forged. The immense difficulty of achieving this profound societal transformation against deeply ingrained human nature and the current trajectory, which often reinforces the very illusions and superficiality that hinder awakening, remains the central enigma of our inquiry. We have posited a path forward, outlining radical educational reforms, the cultivation of sacred spaces for nuance, strategic communication, and ultimately a collective spiritual awakening. Yet, to merely delineate these solutions without confronting the formidable, almost insurmountable obstacles to their implementation would be to offer a palliative without acknowledging the virulent nature of the disease. The question then becomes, why is this transformation so extraordinarily difficult? What are the fundamental, often unseen forces that render society so recalcitrant to its own intellectual and spiritual amelioration? The answer, we contend, lies in a deeper apprehension of the pervasive hegemony of the will as articulated by Schopenhauer, and its insidious influence not merely on individual psyches, but on the very architecture of societal structures and the collective human experience. The will, that blind, ceaseless striving, is not merely an internal impulse. It is the unseen architect of our social institutions, the silent arbiter of our values, and the subtle definer of what constitutes, quote, 53, quote, or, quote, 54, quote, society, in its current manifestation, is largely a grand, elaborate representation, constructed by the collective will to serve its own relentless perpetuation. It is a complex tapestry woven from desires, fears, ambitions, and the ceaseless pursuit of comfort and security, a pursuit often predicated on a carefully managed ignorance of discomforting truths. Within this framework, the will exhibits a profound preference for representation over truth. It constructs narratives, ideologies, and cultural norms that are not necessarily aligned with objective reality, but are supremely functional in maintaining the illusion of coherence and purpose, thereby facilitating its own striving. Consider the myriad ways in which economic systems valorize accumulation. Political systems prioritize power, and social systems reward conformity. Each of these structures, while appearing rational on the surface, can be understood as expressions of the will's drive, creating an environment where unvarnished clarity, the very hallmark of profound intelligence, becomes not merely unwelcome but an existential threat to the established order. The genius, with their capacity for detached observation, holds up a mirror not to the beautiful, comforting representation that society has meticulously crafted, but to the raw, often chaotic and fundamentally meaningless will that underpins it all. This is a reflection no society, deeply invested in its own self-affirming fictions, can tolerate for long without experiencing profound cognitive dissonance. This inherent preference for representation over truth culminates in a deeply entrenched architecture of cognitive resistance within the collective human psyche. We have previously touched upon cognitive dissonance and ego defense mechanisms, but the resistance runs deeper, touching upon fundamental human needs for coherence and meaning. The average human intellect, primarily a tool of the will, seeks to create order from chaos, to find purpose in existence, and to establish a stable, predictable worldview. When the truly intelligent individual challenges these foundational narratives, they do not merely offer a different perspective, they threaten the very fabric of meaning, plunging the collective into a terrifying abyss of anomy. The human mind, in its innate drive for self-preservation and psychological equilibrium, will almost invariably recoil from such a disruption, preferring the comforting, albeit illusory, coherence of the known to the disquieting, unsettling expanse of unvarnished truth. This is not a conscious malice, but an almost instinctual self-defense mechanism, where the integrity of one's worldview is held paramount. Furthermore, the social fabric itself is often woven with threads that actively discourage profound intellectual independence. Conformity in countless subtle and overt ways is rewarded, while deviation is met with suspicion, ostracization, or outright hostility. The pursuit of intellectual depth often necessitates a solitude, a detachment from the mundane concerns that bind society together, which can be perceived as arrogance or social ineptitude. The social cost of intellectual independence is often immense, extending beyond mere professional setbacks to a profound sense of isolation. Society, in its collective wisdom, or lack thereof, often prioritizes harmony and group cohesion over challenging introspection, creating an environment where intellectual bravery is a rare and often punished virtue. The ego, that delicate construct of personal identity, is deeply intertwined with these accepted beliefs and social validations. To challenge these beliefs, therefore, feels like a direct assault on one's very being, eliciting a defensive reaction that can manifest as anger, ridicule, or dismissal. The truly intelligent individual, by virtue of their unvarnished clarity, inadvertently triggers this primal defense mechanism in those who are not prepared to confront the uncomfortable truths about themselves or their world. This architecture of resistance is not merely psychological. It is systematically reinforced by the very institutions designed to educate, inform, and guide society. Education systems, for instance, often prioritize rote learning, the regurgitation of established facts, and the acquisition of vocational skills over the cultivation of critical inquiry, intellectual humility, or the comfort with ambiguity that defines true wisdom. Students are frequently taught what to think rather than how to think independently, to question foundational assumptions, or to embrace the Socratic method of relentless self-examination. This pedagogical approach, while efficient in producing compliant citizens and productive workers, inadvertently stifles the very intellectual courage and nuanced thinking required to appreciate profound intelligence. It molds minds to fit into existing structures rather than empowering them to transcend them. Similarly, the pervasive influence of modern media and information ecosystems exacerbates this predicament. In an era of instant gratification and shrinking attention spans, nuance is sacrificed for sensationalism. Complexity is distilled into simplistic sound bites, and careful deliberation is replaced by tribalistic pronouncements. Digital echo chambers, fueled by algorithms designed to reinforce existing biases, create impenetrable fortresses of belief, where dissenting voices, especially those offering profound, uncomfortable truths, are easily dismissed, demonized, or simply filtered out. The commercial imperative, often driving these platforms, prioritizes engagement over enlightenment, leading to a profligate spread of superficiality and a concomitant erosion of the capacity for deep, sustained intellectual engagement. When the very channels of communication are geared towards the lowest common denominator, the articulate profundity of the truly intelligent individual finds no receptive ear, no fertile ground for its seeds of insight. Even our political and economic systems, ostensibly designed for societal well-being, often thrive on a certain level of public ignorance, or a focused attention on mundane, immediate concerns, rather than deep philosophical inquiry or a critical examination of fundamental values. Complex issues are reduced to binary choices, and long-term consequences are often overshadowed by short-term gains. The will, in its ceaseless striving, finds ample expression in these systems, encouraging a relentless pursuit of material accumulation and power, often at the expense of genuine wisdom or a revaluation of societal priorities. A populace deeply engaged in profound philosophical self-reflection might prove inconvenient to systems that rely on a degree of managed distraction and consumption. Schopenhauer's insights further illuminate the inherent limitations of the average intellect, positing a fundamental difference in cognitive capacity and mode of apprehension between the genius and the common person. The average intellect, he argued, is primarily practical, meticulously geared towards serving the will in its ceaseless striving for existence and propagation. It is an instrument for navigating the world of representations to secure individual and collective survival. Consequently, it apprehends reality in a fragmented utilitarian manner, focusing on relations, causes, and effects relevant to its immediate desires and goals. It is inherently subjective, perpetually coloured by the will's demands. The genius, by contrast, possesses a unique capacity for detaching intellect from the service of the will. This allows for a pure, objective apprehension of the Platonic ideas, the eternal forms that underlie the phenomenal world, unclouded by personal desires or practical considerations. This is not merely a difference in degree of intelligence, but a qualitative, almost ontological divergence in the very way reality is perceived. The average intellect, bound by its subservience to the will, cannot genuinely grasp this detached, objective perspective without a fundamental shift in its own nature. It lacks the requisite faculty, the spiritual lens, to perceive the world through the unvarnished clarity that defines the genius. It is akin to asking a colorblind person to appreciate the nuances of a vibrant painting. The capacity simply isn't there, not as a moral failing, but as an inherent limitation of their perceptual apparatus. This fundamental dichotomy makes true empathy or understanding across this intellectual divide exceedingly difficult. The common person, perceiving reality through the distorting lens of their own will-driven representations, cannot truly comprehend the genius's apprehension of reality as will in itself or as pure idea. They interpret the genius's detachment as coldness, their profound insights as eccentricities, and their challenge to conventional wisdom as arrogance. The genius speaks a language of universal forms and objective truths, while society responds in the vernacular of ego, desire, and utility. This communication breakdown is not merely semantic, it is epistemic, rooted in divergent modes of being and apprehension. Revisiting our proposed solutions, radical educational reform, the cultivation of spaces for nuance, strategic communication, and a collective spiritual awakening, we must therefore acknowledge the almost quixotic nature of the endeavour. To implement these solutions against such deeply entrenched forces requires not just effort, but a profound generational reorientation of human consciousness. The spiritual awakening we speak of is not a simple choice or a superficial shift in attitude. It is a profound evolutionary leap, requiring a revaluation of the entire human species' fundamental drive, a gradual detachment from the will's blind striving and the illusions of Maya. It demands a societal pivot from material gain and egoic validation to inner wisdom, empathy, and objective understanding. Yet, the current societal trajectory, marked by increasing polarization, digital superficiality, and a pervasive emphasis on individualistic gratification, often seems to move away from this ideal. The very conditions that necessitate the genius's insights, the rampant illusions, the spiritual blindness, the collective attachment to comfortable fictions, are simultaneously the forces that render the genius an anomaly, a disquieting mirror that society instinctively shatters. The challenge is not merely to build new structures of learning and communication, but to dismantle, or at least sublimate, the deeply ingrained mechanisms of resistance that reside at the core of human nature. This is a task that transcends mere policy changes or educational curricula. It necessitates a transformation of consciousness itself, a shift in the very telos of human existence. Understanding the depth of this resistance, its psychological, institutional, and ontological roots, is not an act of despair, but the indispensable first step towards any meaningful, albeit arduous, progress. It is to confront the full scope of the challenge, to appreciate the profound inertia of the human condition, before daring to envision a different future. The formidable chasm separating profound intelligence from societal receptivity, as we have meticulously delineated, is not merely a matter of differing perspectives or intellectual gradients. Rather, it constitutes an inherent, almost ontological resistance, deeply interwoven with the very fabric of human consciousness, as primarily driven by the Schopenhauerian will. To speak of overcoming such deeply ingrained systemic and inherent resistances is to embark upon a project of monumental scope, one that demands a radical re-evaluation of what it means to perceive, to know, and to coexist. The challenge, therefore, is not simply to bridge a gap, but to fundamentally alter the landscape upon which that gap exists, transforming the very mechanisms of human apprehension and societal interaction. We observe with an almost chilling clarity how the collective human psyche erects an implacable wall against insights that threaten its established order, its comforting fictions, and its deeply cherished representations. This is not a conscious malice, but an intricate defense mechanism, operating on multiple levels simultaneously. At its most fundamental, there is the cognitive aversion to novelty and complexity, a primal preference for the familiar, the easily digestible, and the reaffirming. The human mind in its daily operations seeks efficiency and coherence, often at the expense of accuracy or depth. Unvarnished clarity, particularly when it dissects the comforting illusions of Maya, introduces a jarring dissonance, a rupture in the perceived coherence of reality that the intellect, bound by the will, is ill-equipped and unwilling to process. The truly intelligent individual, in presenting a nuanced truth, inadvertently triggers a cascade of defensive reactions, intellectual dismissal, emotional discomfort, and ultimately, social rejection. This aversion is further compounded by the powerful influence of ego defense mechanisms. To admit the veracity of a profound insight that contradicts one's long-held beliefs, one's identity, or one's social standing is to undergo a form of psychological death. The ego, a construct deeply entwined with the will's assertion, perceives such an intellectual challenge as an existential threat. It is easier, and certainly less painful, to invalidate the messenger than to confront the unsettling implications of the message. This manifests as character assassination, the projection of perceived flaws onto the intelligent individual, or the deliberate misinterpretation of their ideas, all strategies designed to protect the fragile edifice of the self and its comforting world picture. The genius in their unpretentious articulation of truth becomes an unwitting assailant, not of individuals, but of their carefully constructed psychological armor. Moreover, the hegemony of social conformity acts as an insidious amplifier of these individual resistances. Humans are fundamentally social creatures, hardwired for belonging and acceptance. To deviate from the collective narrative to embrace a truth that the majority finds unpalatable is to risk ostracism, isolation, and the profound discomfort of being an outlier. The collective, driven by its own inertia and its shared representations, exerts immense pressure on its members to maintain intellectual and emotional alignment. Any individual who dares to genuinely consider the uncomfortable truths presented by a truly intelligent mind must contend not only with their own internal resistances, but also with the formidable weight of societal expectation and the implicit threat of social marginalization. This creates a powerful disincentive for genuine intellectual inquiry and receptivity, cementing the walls of collective ignorance. The path to dismantling these deeply entrenched barriers, therefore, cannot begin with grand societal pronouncements or superficial policy changes. It must commence with a profound and often painful introspection at the individual level. We must cultivate within ourselves the capacity for radical self-interrogation, a willingness to scrutinize the very foundations of our beliefs, our assumptions, and our cherished representations. This requires a conscious effort to identify and challenge our inherent cognitive biases, the confirmation bias that seeks only information that affirms existing views, the normalcy bias that dismisses threats because they are unprecedented, and the myriad other mental shortcuts that prevent us from engaging with complexity and nuance. This internal audit is the first, indispensable step towards intellectual liberation, a preliminary detachment from the will's relentless drive for self-affirmation. Central to this individual transformation is the development of intellectual humility. This is not a feigned modesty, but a genuine acknowledgement of the vastness of the unknown and the inherent limitations of one's own perspective. It is the wisdom to understand that our individual intellects, however sharp, are but small apertures through which the boundless complexity of reality is filtered. Such humility fosters an openness to alternative viewpoints, a curiosity about ideas that challenge our comfort zones, and a readiness to admit when one is wrong. It transforms intellectual friction from a personal attack into an opportunity for growth, a chance to refine one's understanding rather than defend one's ego. Schopenhauer, in his sagacious observations, implicitly champions this humility by highlighting the limitations of the intellect when enslaved by the will, suggesting that true understanding begins only when we acknowledge this subservience. Furthermore, we must learn to embrace cognitive dissonance as a catalyst for growth, rather than an impetus for retreat. The discomfort that arises when confronted with a truth that contradicts our existing worldview is not a signal to shut down or deflect. It is an invitation to expand. This requires a fundamental shift in our emotional relationship with intellectual challenge. Instead of perceiving it as a threat, we must learn to view it as a necessary growing pain, a sign that our cognitive frameworks are being stretched and reconfigured. This deliberate engagement with intellectual discomfort is a crucial exercise in weakening the will's grip, which perpetually seeks the path of least resistance and greatest comfort. It is through this sustained engagement that the rigid structures of our representations begin to soften, allowing for the ingress of unvarnished clarity. The courage required for this internal transformation is immense, the courage to look inward and confront our own ingrained prejudices and self-deceptions, and the courage to look outward and genuinely engage with truths that may dismantle our most cherished beliefs about the world and our place within it. This is not merely an intellectual exercise, it is a profound spiritual discipline. It is about choosing the arduous path of understanding over the comfortable illusion of certainty, choosing the unsettling mirror of truth over the flattering distortions of self-deception. Schopenhauer's philosophy, particularly his distinction between the intellect serving the will and the intellect momentarily freed from it, provides a powerful framework for understanding this aspirational shift. While he posited that true detachment from the will, leading to the apprehension of Platonic ideas, is largely the domain of the genius, we contend that aspects of this cognitive posture can be cultivated by the collective. This is not to suggest that society can, or should, become a collective of geniuses, but rather that it can aspire to adopt some of the conditions that allow for genuine insight. It means fostering an environment where the intellect is encouraged, even trained, to momentarily suspend the will's demands for self-preservation and affirmation, allowing for a fleeting yet profound apprehension of reality beyond its immediate desires and fears. This collective aspiration demands a radical reimagination of our educational paradigms. Beyond merely imparting information, education must become a crucible for critical inquiry, a training ground for intellectual humility, and a safe space for the exploration of discomforting truths. It must cultivate the very virtues we have outlined: self-interrogation, the embracing of dissonance, and the courage to challenge established representations. Such an educational framework would not seek to produce uniform thinkers, but rather individuals capable of independent, nuanced thought, who are equipped to engage with profound intelligence not as a threat, but as a vital resource for collective enlightenment. However, we must remain acutely aware that this transformation is not a quick fix, nor is it easily achieved. The hegemony of the will is a deeply entrenched force, operating through millennia of evolutionary conditioning and societal reinforcement. The dismantling of these resistances, therefore, is an arduous, multi-generational endeavour, a slow and deliberate ascent towards a more receptive and enlightened human consciousness. It is a spiritual awakening that requires sustained effort, profound patience, and an unwavering commitment to the pursuit of unvarnished clarity, even when that clarity proves disquieting. The initial cracks in the wall of resistance must be painstakingly carved out. One individual, one moment of courageous introspection, at a time, before a broader societal shift can even begin to manifest.